One afternoon, as Ethan was closing the shop, a bright poster caught his eye on the old community board across the street. The paper was slightly torn, fluttering in the wind, but the words were clear: Open Talent Night, sing, dance, perform. All are welcome. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He read the line again and again, as if it might disappear if he looked away. For the rest of the day, his mind refused to stay quiet. While arranging shelves and handing change to customers, the poster replayed in his thoughts. All are welcome. Did that include someone like him? Someone who had never stood on a stage, never faced a crowd, never been truly heard. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. The walls of his small room felt closer than usual. He sat on his bed, staring at his worn-out shoes, imagining himself under bright lights. Fear rushed in quickly. His hands shook at the thought of people laughing, whispering, or walking out. His past silences suddenly felt safer than the risk of being seen. But then he sang, softly at first, then louder. The song filled the room, steadying his breath. For the first time, he realized how tired he was of hiding. How long could he keep his voice locked away? Outside, the moonlight spilled through the window, and something inside him shifted. The next morning, Ethan stood in front of the community board. His name hovered in his mind like a weight. Slowly, with trembling fingers, he picked up the pen and wrote Ethan Miller, singing. His handwriting was uneven, his heart racing, but once the ink dried, there was no turning back. As he stepped away, fear still followed him, but hope walked beside it. That single decision, small as it seemed, marked the first brave step toward a life he had never dared to imagine. In a small, ordinary town where days passed quietly and dreams rarely grew beyond routine, there lived a young boy named Ethan. He was not poor, not rich, not famous, just invisible. Every morning, Ethan walked the same narrow streets, his head slightly lowered, his footsteps soft enough to go unnoticed. People passed him every day, yet hardly anyone truly saw him. Ethan helped his mother run a tiny neighborhood shop. Customers came and went, greeting others warmly, but when it came to Ethan, they barely nodded. He answered politely, always with a gentle smile, but words never stayed long on his lips. Silence had become his shield. At school, teachers overlooked him, assuming he had nothing important to say. Classmates talked over him, laughed around him, and never once asked what he dreamed of becoming. But Ethan carried a secret, one that lived deep inside his heart. Every night, when the town fell asleep and the noise of the world faded away, Ethan's room came alive with music. He would close the door, sit near the window, and sing softly into the darkness. His voice was raw, emotional, and honest. Singing was the only time he felt strong, free, and truly himself. He never told anyone about this hidden talent. Fear held him back, fear of being laughed at, fear of failing, fear of being seen. Yet as he stared at his reflection in the mirror, singing to his own shadow, a quiet question echoed in his mind: what if my voice deserves to be heard? Unaware to the world, in that quiet corner of the town, a powerful journey was slowly beginning. The night of the talent show arrived faster than Ethan expected. The community hall was alive with noise, people chatting, laughing, and clapping loudly for each performance. Bright lights hung from the ceiling, making the small stage feel much bigger than it really was. Ethan stood backstage, his heart pounding so hard it felt like the entire room could hear it. One by one, performers went on stage. Some danced confidently, others sang popular songs, and the crowd reacted with cheerful applause. Ethan kept wiping his sweaty palms on his jeans, silently repeating his name in his head as if it might disappear. When the host finally called, "Next up, Ethan Miller," the room grew slightly confused. A few people looked around, trying to figure out who he was. As Ethan walked onto the stage, whispers spread through the audience. Some recognized him as the quiet boy from the shop. Others smiled in disbelief. A few even laughed. Is he really going to sing? Someone muttered. Another voice chuckled, this should be interesting. Each laugh felt like a sharp sting. The microphone stood in front of him, cold and unfamiliar. The bright lights blurred his vision, and for a moment, he wanted to run. His throat tightened, and doubt rushed back stronger than ever. This was a mistake, his mind screamed. Then Ethan remembered the nights in his room, the mirror, the silence, the songs that carried his pain. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. The laughter faded into the background as he leaned toward the microphone. The first note left his lips, soft but steady. The room slowly quieted. Within seconds, the whispers stopped. The laughter died. Something had changed. And before anyone realized it, the boy they had mocked was no longer invisible, he was commanding the stage. As Ethan continued to sing, the atmosphere inside the hall completely transformed. His voice grew stronger with every note, filled with emotion that words alone could never explain. It wasn't just a song, it was his story. Every line carried years of silence, rejection, and hidden dreams. The audience, once loud and careless, now sat frozen, as if afraid to break the moment. People in the front rows leaned forward. A woman pressed her hand against her mouth, her eyes shining with tears. A man who had laughed earlier now stared at the stage in disbelief. Ethan's voice trembled slightly, not from fear anymore, but from the depth of feeling pouring out of him. The spotlight no longer felt heavy, it felt warm, almost welcoming. Ethan opened his eyes and saw faces changed by his music. Some were crying softly. Others closed their eyes, letting the song wash over them. The hall was silent, not an empty silence, but a powerful one, full of respect and emotion. For the first time in his life, people weren't ignoring him. They were listening. As he reached the final note, his voice rose gently and then faded into stillness. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The silence stretched, thick with emotion. Ethan lowered the microphone, unsure of what would come next. Then suddenly, someone began to clap. One clap turned into many. The applause grew louder and louder, filling the hall with thunderous sound. People stood to their feet, cheering, wiping tears, calling his name. Ethan felt his chest tighten, not with fear, but with overwhelming relief. In that moment, he understood something deeply, his voice had power. And it had finally been heard. The applause seemed endless. Ethan stood frozen on the stage, his eyes wide, his heart overflowing with emotions he had never felt before. The same people who had laughed moments earlier were now standing, clapping, and cheering his name. The sound wrapped around him like a warm embrace. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel small. As he stepped off the stage, strangers stopped him. Some shook his hand, others hugged him, and a few told him how his song reminded them of their own hidden dreams. A local music teacher approached him with shining eyes and said, "You have something special. Don't ever hide it again." Ethan could barely speak, his voice had already said everything. Later that night, Ethan walked home under the quiet sky. The town felt different, even though nothing had physically changed. The same streets, the same buildings. But inside him, something powerful had shifted. The fear that once controlled him had loosened its grip. In its place was belief. At home, his mother looked at him with pride and tears in her eyes. She didn't need words to understand. She had always known her son carried something beautiful inside him. Ethan smiled, a real smile, one that reached his eyes. The next morning, people greeted him differently. They smiled, waved, and spoke his name. But more important than their attention was what Ethan had gained, confidence. He no longer needed to hide in quiet corners or sing only to his reflection. That night on stage was not the end, it was the beginning. A beginning of courage, of being seen, and of believing that even the quietest voices can rise and change everything.